The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Sunday, the 22nd of June, 2025, and I'm flying solo again today. We had this on Monday with Brian Hooker, and now we've got it again with Mary. She unfortunately can't be here to do the news this week, so I'm going to read you some headlines, and then we're going to go to a documentary, a 30-minute documentary. Then we have our geoengineering report, and then we have our story of the day. So here we go with our first headline. It's from CNBC. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s new vaccine advisors will vote on flu shots containing mercury. They will vote on a shot preservative that contains mercury, which is, they say, it's mainstream news, remember, they say is safely used in some flu jabs. Well, I'm pretty sure that mercury has never been safe at any level whatsoever. And the stories that we heard on the bus, remember, from those flu shots were either death or massive destruction. So that's not true. CNBC then goes on to say it has been incorrectly linked to autism in the past. So there's that old one again. The ACIP committee will hear a presentation and vote on the preservative. Now, remember, these are Bobby's new vaccine advisors, so we expect big things from this. We are going to be streaming this on chd.tv. We're going to be live, to sign up for those text alerts, and we'll alert you when we are live with this ACIP meeting. It's June the 26th, and Dr. Nass will be live blogging, so that should be a really good event. And also get on that chat between yourselves and talk about what is going on. It's kind of exciting because this is, we expect big things from this. Of course, we wanted other people maybe potentially to be on that ACIP committee, but I'm going to put my faith in Bobby on this, and we'll be watching. We're watching. Brenda Belletti here in The Defender. The CEOs of BioNTech, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck make the list of the highest paid pharma executives. BioNTech CEO earned the highest salary at $287 million. Second place was Eli Lilly's CEO, David Ricks, with $29.2 million. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla at $24.6 million. And it goes on, so there's that article there. So I don't know how these people sleep at night, to be honest with you all, after all the death and destruction that's been caused by their products. Michael Nevadakis in The Defender. CDC scientist who drove COVID and RSV vaccine policy resigns in protest. In her resignation letter, Dr. Fiona Havers cited concerns about the future of vaccine policy under HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Havers is the second, we reported on another one last week, second CDC vaccine expert to resign in under 2 weeks. Well, bye-bye, Fiona Havers. She's probably got a job in Big Pharma now, I would say. That's how it always goes. Well, now, the New York Times then wrote an article saying why a vaccine expert left the CDC. Americans are going to die. This is Dr. Fiona Havers again. She's so influential among researchers who study immunizations, probably big pharma researchers, I would think. The wholesale dismissal of the agency's scientific advisors crossed the line, she said. She's really upset. Bit of sour grapes going on there. And when she says Americans are going to die, I would say Americans already are dying, have been dying for a long time because of people like Dr. Fiona Havers who sign off on immunizations or work on immunizations that kill people. It's a good job Mary's not here this week, is she not? To say, Polly, calm down. Okay, Brownstein Institute in The Defender. Why are medical students, or anyone for that matter, still required to get COVID vaccines? COVID-19 vaccines aren't harmless. Myocarditis hits young men at a rate of 1 to 10 per 100,000 mRNA doses. This is according to a 2022 Journal of the American Medical Association study. Medical schools in particular should know better. They should move away from these mandates. That's quite right. Why anyone is getting the COVID shot, with everything that we know now and the amount of death and destruction we've seen, it's barbaric. Brenda Belletti in The Defender. COVID pandemic interventions, not the virus, drove the spikes in excess mortality. So this is Canadian researchers who analyzed detailed geographic all-cause mortality data from the US and North America. And they concluded that the data are incompatible with existing models of pandemic viral spread. The findings suggest that pandemic control policies are flawed and dangerous. Medical treatments caused spikes in mortality in 2020. Michael Nevadakis again in The Defender. Whistleblower lawsuit alleging hospital failed to report COVID vaccine injuries gets the green light. This is a whistleblower lawsuit that alleged a New York hospital system violated federal law by failing to report adverse events connected to the COVID-19 vaccines. It can proceed. A federal court ruled this last week. Deborah Conrad said she was fired from the United Memorial Medical Center in Rochester, New York, for reporting vaccine-related adverse events to VAERS. Okay, now we covered this last week, but this is a particularly good article in The Defender. It explains much better than the mainstream one that we used last week. So Sanders and King introduced this bill to ban prescription drug advertising to consumers. If this act passes, it will ban all prescription drug ads on television, radio, print, and digital platforms, including social media. The ban would hit drug companies hard, and they would make back in sales up to 5 times as much as they spent on commercials. It will also affect the income streams of major television networks, which brings billions of dollars from pharmaceutical ads. But maybe they won't be so held up by Big Pharma, and they'll be more like CHGTV, where we don't take any money from any pharmaceutical companies, and that's why we can say what we like, the truth. Okay, Michael Nevadakis again. This is Grace's trial, Grace Shearer's trial. I know a lot of you have been watching that on CHGTV. It's come to an end, and we are going to get the answers soon on that. And we will be getting Scott back on CHGTV, Grace's dad, to tell us what the results are and talk us through that. But I have to say, personally, I'm so proud of that family. They have really gone beyond to get up there and speak up for their daughter and fight for the truth. And Grace represents so many people, as you know, that were killed in the hospital protocols. So really proud of that family for doing this. Anyway, this Defender's headline is Witness Alleges Hospital's Egregious Breaches of Standard of Care Kill Teen. The witness testimony continued this week in the wrongful death trial of Grace Shearer. She was a 19-year-old with Down syndrome. She died in a Wisconsin hospital days after being admitted for a COVID-19 infection. Grace's sister and expert witnesses testified that doctors violated the standard of care and principles of informed consent. I know many of you know Grace's story. It was in VAX 3 a little bit, but we also did record the story for CHGTV, so do find that on our site if you want to catch up on that. Right, back in The Defender. KFF Health News reports on dangerous food additive, but it doesn't mention at all that it was also used in vaccines. So emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 are used in processed foods. Vaccine experts said this raised the question, if the chemical is too dangerous to ingest, why are we injecting it into newborns or in fact anyone? That's a great question and a good article. So there's that there in the show notes for you. Staying on food dyes, the National Review reported that Kraft Heinz is to remove artificial food dyes from its products. It's a victory for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And they will do this by 2027. Kraft Heinz said that it would not be launching any new products with any artificial dyes at all. I guess that's good news for people that buy Kraft Heinz. All right, so we have a 5G documentary. There's an article in Defender by Suzanne Burdick. It's called 5G, The Untold Story. It's a new documentary spotlighting the health hazards of wireless radiation. The world's first documentary on the real-world health effects of 5G features interviews with previously healthy residents of Stockholm in Sweden who experienced serious health problems within days of having 5G antennas activated near their homes. And we're going to play that now, and then we're going to go to the geoengineering, and then we're going to go to our story. Now, tomorrow, I actually have a day off, which I'm so excited about. So Mary's going to host a show tomorrow morning with you, and Mothers-to-Be will be on there as well. So I will see you back on Tuesday with Michael Caine, but enjoy this documentary. It's only 30 minutes long, and do share it to people who need to be educated on this subject. And pray big, stand firm, never settle. Much love to you all, and I'll see you on Tuesday.
5G was introduced in Sweden and many other countries in 2020. This new technology is intended to provide much faster transmission speed, and it uses higher frequencies than 3G and 4G. 5G emit 10 to 100 times higher levels of microwave radiation than previous systems. The 5G started to be deployed without any study being performed previously investigating the health impacts from this new technology.
I'm a medical doctor, oncologist, so I have been treating cancer patients. My research into environmental agents and cancer risk started with the Agent Orange stuff that was used in Sweden too. That was in the 1960s and 70s, and I met back in 1980s or late 1970s patients with a special type of cancer that have been spraying in the woods with this Agent Orange stuff. And at that time it was not widely known that there was a dioxin problem, a TCDD problem. I went on with other studies on persistent organic pollutants like PCB and cancer risks and so on. And finally, during the last 2 decades or a bit more, studying the radio frequency radiation and cancer risks. So we have published a number of studies on cancer risks, mainly on using the mobile phone and the risk for tumors in the brain, glioma, and also on the hearing nerve, acoustic neurinoma, which were confirmed in our studies and also in other to be about 2 to 3 times increased risk if you have used the mobile phone for a substantial number of years, 10 years or more. And from that on we have moved to look into the environmental exposure to radio frequencies mostly from base stations, which is a really growing problem with the introduction of 5G, etc.
I'm a journalist. Usually you call it like an investigative reporter, and also done a lot of documentaries, especially in the field of radio. And so I've been working many years for the Swedish public service, for the radio mostly, and some TV also. And then since a few years back I started my own channel, which is called Folkets Radio, the People's Radio. I think this was also, in the time when they were introducing 5G. I was acquainted with a guy who was driving around in Stockholm and measuring in people's homes. So I was offered to go along with him for a day. So I brought my recorder and my microphone, and we were riding around Stockholm and meeting people who were complaining about this. There was especially one place in Kista, a suburb to Stockholm, where a woman, I think of Iranian descent, she was complaining that there was tons of these antennas on her roof just above her ceiling. And her daughter was waking up in the middle of the night with nose bleeding and all kinds of problems. And she was really desperate. So I made an interview with her, and it was heartbreaking, really. But I didn't feel anything. So I said, could you show me one place in this apartment where you think it's really bad? So she said, well, here is this kitchen table. We don't use this anymore because people who come here, even if they have no prior knowledge, they ask, is there something strange in this apartment? So I said, okay. So I sat there and I started my clock, and I was just in my tape recorder. And in 1 minute and 2 minutes and nothing happened, 3 minutes. But then after like 4 minutes, it started pinching in my hand, in the arm. And it sort of gets stronger and stronger. So after like 7 minutes, I decided, yeah, I do feel something. So I sort of, and then we thanked her. And then when I came down from the elevator, it was like an elephant had been standing on my chest. I lost my breath, and I was completely, dehydrated. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds, and that was sort of the first time that I really felt, wow, this really has some impact.
The fact that 5G was to be deployed without any previous safety studies upset a number of scientists that called for safety studies to be done before the 5G deployment. They were concerned that due to the increasing radiation exposure and the use of new frequencies, 5G would lead to potential serious health consequences. They also stressed that harmful effects from previous systems like 2G, 3G and the 4G were already shown to appear well below the levels expected from the 5G antennas.
And then I think 1 or 2 years later, I was moving in here and I was feeling sort of pain in my chest. And I think normally I wouldn't have any, I would just wonder, why do I have that? But since I was working with this topic, it came to my mind, what if actually this 5G tower is affecting me? So I asked one of the people that I interviewed who has this kind of meter, IMF meter, if he could come to my place and measure. And so he did, and he said, oh, it's quite high actually in your bedroom.
The Swedish Radiation Protection Foundation was contacted by a number of people complaining of various symptoms such as sleeping problems, headaches, dizziness, heart problems after 5G base stations had been deployed close to their apartments or houses. This is exactly the same symptoms that had been identified in scientific studies during the last 25 years among people living close to mobile phone masts. Dr. Lennart Hardell then suggested that we should investigate the health effects and radiation levels from 5G. We have this far published 8 case studies and 1 summary of the studies. Shockingly, these case studies are this far the only studies that have investigated health impacts on people exposed to 5G in real life.
This type of research is not done in other places, as far as I know, around the world. But these have been case reports, people who have talked about their symptoms after 5G was implemented on the building or on the other side of the street, and they get these typical symptoms, as you can include them in the microwave syndrome, with headache, fatigue, difficulties to sleep, etc. There can be muscle pains and problems from the stomach and from the heart, of course, too. So there's quite a lot of symptoms, and they can develop very quickly when you are exposed, in contrast to cancer, which we haven't studied, which is a long-term effect. I mean, 5G started some 4 or 5 years ago in Sweden, 2020, and the cancer effect will come up after 10, 15 or 20 years. You have both the cancer risk in long term, but you have these acute symptoms, which some people develop, others do not. Many may have them, but they are not aware of the connection with the radio frequency radiation. Furthermore, this is like classic provocation studies, because most of these people have had to leave their office or homes to another place for living, and then their symptoms disappear within a very short time, within a few days.
I have lived in my apartment almost 30 years, and I had base stations near my apartment for many years, 3G, 4G, but after they upgraded to 5G, they put up a lot of more antennas. It was 3 times bigger, the antenna elements, and what worried me, I saw that they were pointing it directly to my apartment, and they placed it on a house that was lower than the house I was living in, so it was directly in front of my house. And I measured later on that it was around 22 meters away from my apartment. During the first week, I started to notice that pattern, that each night around 10 or 11, I sensed a hard beating of my heart, and it continued during all night until I left my home. And I remember when the weekend came, my heart was beating non-stop Friday night until Monday morning. I was out of energy, started to get headaches, and I had visit of my ex, and she immediately felt, after half an hour sitting in my living room, she felt pain in her brain and started to crying and asked me what is happening, what is this? Is this the antenna, 5G antenna? What's happening here? I november 2021 efter att ha bott i samma hus i ungefär 10 år så märker jag hur det börjar slamra på taket. Och efter mycket om och men fick jag reda på att det var en av de större mobiloperatörerna i Sverige som skulle montera nya antenner på taket. 5G då bland annat. Innan det här hände så fanns det en befintlig basstation på taket med en äldre version då. Så jag kände till att man kunde mäta mikrovågsstrålning så jag kontaktade en man som kunde mäta upp det här ordentligt då innan det här var installerat. Så vi fick de mätvärden före de här 5G-masterna installerades.
När man hade kopplat in 5G då så fick jag väldigt snabbt och tydligt symptom. När jag kände att allting, det bara var fel i kroppen. Jag fick huvudvärk, yrsel, tinnitus, det stack i huden. Och jag försökte lägga mig i ett annat rum. Det var lite bättre där men inte mycket. Jag var ju medveten om det här att det finns något som heter placeboeffekt. Att tankar och känslor påverkade. Så jag provade verkligen mig själv. Hur fungerade jag och hur var jag på min arbetsplats? Ute, inne, i olika rum och hemma hos andra och sådär. Och det slutade alltid med att samma symptom kom när jag kom hem och speciellt då uttalat i sängen.
Det vi gjorde då när vi insåg att det här var i drift, det var att jag igen kontaktade den här mannen då som utförde mätningar, mikrovågsmätningar. Och då fann vi ju, eller han sa så här att med de strålningsvärden som vi då uppmätte så sa han: här kan ni inte bo, packa era väskor. Före installationen med den då gamla befintliga utrustningen mätte vi 6000 mikrowatt per kvadratmeter. Och efter installationen när den var fullt i driftstagen så mätte vi då minst 2,5 miljoner mikrowatt per kvadratmeter. Och det slog i botten. Speciellt på Kerstins sida av sängen där av någon konstig anledning. Men antennen satt alltså precis ovanför vårt sovrum, 5-7 meter därifrån. Så det gjorde vi. Vi packade våra väskor och nu hade jag tillgång till en liten etta på 30 kvadratmeter där vi då fick dra ut en bäddsoffa och bo då. Vi flyttade ner till kontoret. Jag var bortrest sen i 2 veckor. När jag kom tillbaka så provade jag att bo själv i lägenheten. Det var då mina symptom kom. Och det var sömnsvårigheter, hudrodnad, tinnitus, näsblod fick jag, yrsel. Så då insåg jag ju att jag kan inte bo här heller. Jag får flytta ner också tillsammans med Kerstin då på vår lilla lokal. Och där försvann ju både dina och mina symptom inom någon eller några dagar. Så det var ganska uppenbart att de här symptomen kom ifrån vår lägenhet, det som var på taket.
We had some cases where we had measurements before. They were not low, but it was another technology. It may be some 1,000 microwatts per square meter. But at that time it was 3G and 4G, the types of radiation that were before 5G. But when 5G was installed, they get symptoms very quickly. So it's interesting that these people could actually tolerate the previous generations, but with 5G they got all these myriads of symptoms.
It was an extreme pain I never felt before in my life. It's the strongest pain I ever experienced, and it happened a couple of times, and I thought like I was going to die. So I started to connect the dots, and I just understood it's something wrong with the antenna. This is dangerous. I need to get out of here. I could stay at different places. That saved my situation. Else I would have been forced to move into a hotel. I was kind of scared that if I could not solve this situation, I was afraid I could become homeless. Every time I was revisiting my apartment to pick up my belongings, my symptoms became more severe every time. And I started to notice a pattern that within like 6 or 8 hours the symptoms appeared, and it could go on until the next day. Also, I noticed I got headaches for 5 days. I had hard working during that time. I became more sensitive to RF exposure, that I could not even hold my computer mouse that was Bluetooth without extreme pain. I have been using that for years. All of a sudden I could not hold it. I started to notice more and more sensitivity for RF exposure, and even more I got exposed in my apartment, this sensitivity increased.
Our governments and the industry claim that there are no health risks with the 5G radiation because we have so-called safety limits that protect us against harm. However, they only protect against immediate heating effects that were observed from an hour of extremely high exposure. In consequence, they do not protect against any other effects from long-term exposure, for instance, cancer, sleeping problems, headaches, heart problems, or any other harmful effects that are not due to heating. Therefore, most scientists consider that these limits are insufficient to protect against health hazards. So why are the limits not more protective? The answer is that they are important for the industry. These limits that most countries have adopted are recommended by influential organizations such as the ICNIRP, the World Health Organization, and the European Commission. Both the ICNIRP and the World Health Organization have been criticized for defending the interests of the industry rather than public health. For many years, the World Health Organization even received funding from the telecommunications industry for promoting these limits, and the ICNIRP has also been criticized for having ties to the industry.
There is something with this technology, because it's rapid onset and rapid off, called MIMO, multiple inputs and multiple outputs of the radiation. So it's a bombarding of the human body, and it seems to be especially problematic. And one mechanism could be that there is not very much recover. I mean, usually if you go on cellular level and get a toxin or on a radiation, there can be some damage, but there is also a reparation mechanism in the cells. This cannot be done with 5G because it's so rapid and it's so very high pulses. So they get these toxicological effects on the human body. I mean, this is used in radiotherapy, radiation of cancer. Now, instead of giving the dose once a day, we can divide it and give the dose twice, one dose of the radiation in the morning and another in the afternoon. And we know that the same dose is much more toxic to the cancer cell if it's divided in 2 doses during the day. This has to do with the repair mechanism. So the body doesn't have the time to repair the effect of the radiation when it's given with the short intervals.
So I become very sensitive to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. When I moved to another apartment, I became very sick. I was still in a very bad shape, and I was extremely sensitive to all form of RF exposure. So that's a problem. When you get affected, you can't live in an apartment almost anymore, because there is so huge exposure today, even from your neighbors, because they have Bluetooth speakers, they have Wi-Fi routers, they have mesh networks. We have built a society that makes people sick today.
This is a presentation that a representative of the Ericsson company held in 2017 on the impact of EMF limits on the 5G network rollout. The exclusion zone is the zone where people cannot live or stay for longer periods. If Ericsson has to adapt to limits that are 100 times lower, or in other words, 100 times stricter than the ICNIRP limits, the exclusion zone would be this big compared to the exclusion zone of ICNIRP limits, which is only this area. So it has a huge consequence for Ericsson, and they conclude here, size of exclusion zone with 100 times lower ICNIRP limits makes 5G network rollout a major problem or impossible.
On the other side here, lots of base stations for 5G. I think we can count to 8, and they are located very close to the people who are walking around and close to the heads of people, of course, because it's just one flat building like that. And we have very high exposure here. It's just now we have some 14, 15 volts per meter, but we have measured much higher before. I mean, if you move around and come into the direction of the beam, it will be even higher, maybe 30, 40 volts per meter, which is very close to 50 volts per meter, where you have an increased cancer risk in animal studies. So this place is definitely not safe, and also a place where you can get this microwave syndrome, or the symptoms which are created by radiofrequency radiation. The old town is very crowded by buildings and very narrow streets between, and so they put very high exposure, high radiation from the base stations just to get into the old town. I mean, it's a technology which is badly designed and also badly controlled by the society. And of course people don't understand or are unaware of this, because the radiation doesn't smell it, you can't see it, you can't feel it, etc. So it's a classical environmental agent which you don't know that this is a risk factor. Actually, it's the same with dioxins that are group 1 carcinogens in humans. You can't smell them, you can't feel them, and you can't taste them. It's quite similar. It's a silent cancer agent that we are now having in our surrounding, and that is increasing in the level, of course.
Exposure limits for harmful emissions are normally set to protect the public, and then the industry has to adapt to the limits. But in this case, the limits are rather set to protect the industry's needs. This has become evident ahead of the 5G rollout. The industry put pressure on countries and regions with lower limits than those from the ICNIRP and the World Health Organization to let the limits be less protective, for instance Italy, Brussels and Switzerland. Otherwise 5G could not be deployed.
I have made the measurements around 10 schools in Örebro, my hometown, and there is a very high radiation on the schoolyard. It's tens of thousands of microwatts, like 30, 40,000 microwatts per square meter, which is far away higher than the toxic levels in different studies. As we can see, all ages are affected, but we know from other studies in literature that children in general are more sensitive than grown-ups. And this is of course of concern if you go to like the school situation. I mean, we still have very much use of the wireless technology, and we know that there is an increasing problem with school children with tiredness and headache and so on.
The telecommunications industry is of course the major player pushing for the 5G rollout. 5G is not primarily intended to meet the needs of the public, but rather the needs of the industry. Unfortunately, the industry has shown no interest in the results of our studies and the reported serious health effects of their new 5G technology. Rather, they have taken actions to cover up the health hazards. For instance, a representative from Ericsson, the world-leading provider of 5G base stations, wrote an email to the editor that published our first case study asking for the article to be withdrawn. This is evidence that the industry is working behind the scenes to cover up the health hazards, and it's not interested in any objective investigation of health effects.
They are important, these case reports, because they are the red flags that something is happening. This is the first sign. It's like the Canarian bird down in the mines where they used to have them to see if they reacted on the ambient air quality and could see if they got sick, that, well, it's not good here. And if we look historically, very much of the medical knowledge has started with case studies, like case reports. That's the first sign that something is wrong here. But of course they need to be supplemented with more studies and larger case series and so on.
People are forcibly exposed to this radiation in their own homes without any possibility to say no, without their informed consent, and without any studies showing that it is not harmful. On the contrary, there are increasing evidence that it is harmful, and an increasing number of scientists are warning about the health risks. This situation is, of course, against what we must expect from a democratic society. It shows that the industry has too much influence over how the society handles these risks. It also shows that those organizations and agencies such as the ICNIRP, the World Health Organization, and the European Commission that pretend that they are protecting the public are simply not doing that.
They can say that these levels are below ICNIRP levels, but if you look strictly on 5G from a medical point of view, it shouldn't be there, neither 6G. But the forces against to stop it are extremely strong, of course. Advice would be, of course, to dismantle 5G. I mean, it's a toxic agents that are forced on human beings, because human beings are not asked.
I'm Claire Dooley, you're watching CHD-TV, and this is the Geoengineering Report, where we identify the threat in the skies. In this segment, we unpack solar radiation management, the official justification behind global aerosol spraying. Although it's sold as a tool to cool the planet, it may be accelerating the very collapse it claims to prevent. Our expert Dane explains how programs like stratospheric aerosol injection are being deployed under scientific cover, with devastating ecological and health consequences.
Can we talk about solar radiation programs? What are they, and what are they causing damage? What's going on?
Yeah, that's the premise under which all this is done. people need to stop and consider how much, quote, those who print the money, have already done to themselves. We've discussed this before, but the detonation of 2,400 nuclear bombs all over the globe, the building of nuclear power plants, all of which are going to go into meltdown as society collapses. We're going to have Fukushima times 442, and they're building 60 more. We're not dealing with sanity. We're not dealing with sanity. And the population is unfortunately behaving insane in their own way with their unwillingness to face what's happening and pretending it's all going to just go away. So the premise under which these operations are conducted, Polly, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, the list goes on. Those are the science terms of filling the sky with light scattering particles to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy to slow down the warming of the planet. Again, this is the pharmaceutical approach to the planet's life support systems on steroids. Polly, how many commercials, you see these commercials on TV that the latest pharmaceutical with some strange sounding name and then a list of consequences so long, you wonder who in the world would take that, right?
Herb quit smoking with Chantix and support. Talk to your doctor about Chantix and a support plan that's right for you. Some people have had changes in behavior, hostility, agitation, depressed mood, and suicidal thoughts or actions while taking or after stopping Chantix.
You've seen those commercials. The next commercial is some law firm that is stating if you took last week's pharmaceutical and you're permanently damaged now, you can sue. And
if your loved one committed suicide or was hospitalized for attempted suicide while taking Chantix, find out if we can help you.
The cycle goes on. Unfortunately, with planet Earth, we have no other option once we've destroyed the miraculous life support systems, and that's exactly what's going on. And there's, again, we have a population, even in alt media, that's denying this. It's specifically denying the chemical cooldowns, which, depending on where people are in the U.S., if they're in the eastern half of the lower 48, that's the most consistently chemically cooled region on the entire planet for about a decade and a half. That's not nature. These flash cooldowns are not nature. They're chemically nucleating cloud moisture. That's why we get these 50-degree temperature swings in a day. And we have people in alt media claiming that's a sign of global cooling. No, it's not. It's a sign of climate engineering. We've tested this precipitation. It's highly toxic. It's got climate engineering, chemical ice nucleating elements in it, Polly. So we hope that people in alt media acknowledge the full truth, not blaming all the damage done to the planet on just climate engineering, which is also very destructive to our cause, in that it alienates those in the environmental communities who we need to admit to climate engineering when we deny every other source of damage.
We love hearing from you at CHGTV. We always are going through your emails and, sending them to each other and discussing the pictures you're sending and, whatever comments you're making. So please continue doing so. You can reach out to us at goodmorning@chg.tv. Thank you so much for watching the Geoengineering Report, and we'll see you next time on CHGTV.
These two National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration departure from normal high temperature maps set side by side provide a shocking contrast. They are polar opposites, each meteorologically and historically unprecedented, and are occurring back to back in a relatively narrow frame of time. How is this possible? These extreme and unprecedented weather whiplash scenarios are a direct result of massive climate engineering operations. The constant high-pressure heat dome that's yet again fried the western U.S. all summer long is a direct result of atmospheric manipulation, as massive radio frequency microwave transmissions are used to orchestrate the high-pressure zones which spin clockwise in the northern hemisphere. This in turn spins the high-level winds around the high-pressure zone, leaving hot, dry, and stagnant air filled with geoengineering, moisture-absorbing, desiccant particulates in the atmosphere. The extremely powerful HAARP ionosphere heater facility in Gulkona, Alaska is only one of many large radio frequency microwave transmission sites located around the world that are used for climate modification purposes. The extreme heat and dry conditions that the climate engineering operations create have spawned a recently labeled condition called, quote, flash drought. As expected, studies like the excerpt shown here from NOAA never mention the geoengineering elephant in the room and the extreme climate and environmental consequences that climate engineering is causing around the globe. Record wildfires continue to decimate what is yet left of Earth's forests. Though anthropogenic global warming is a major factor, global climate engineering operations are the single greatest piece of the puzzle relating to the accelerating worldwide forest fire epidemics. Why? Geoengineering completely disrupts the hydrological cycle, contaminates soils, coats the forest foliage with an incendiary dust from the particulate spraying fallout, fuels more dry lightning, destroys the ozone layer, which in turn releases immense UV radiation that fries forest foliage. The weather makers are able to temporarily and toxically cool down large regions with jet stream manipulation, as already mentioned, and with patented chemical ice nucleation elements that are a primary component of the ongoing weather modification operations. In order to utilize the endothermic reacting materials, abundant atmospheric moisture is needed. And this satellite image gives some perspective on how much moisture Hurricane Irma delivered to the eastern U.S., which the climate engineers utilized to create a massive engineered cool-down zone. The same operations were carried out with Hurricane Harvey. The temporary and highly toxic cool-downs come at the cost of an even worse overall planetary warming. In addition to the climate engineering cool-down operations, there's many other agendas being carried out by the atmospheric spraying and microwave transmissions, all part of the geoengineering programs. What was the result of Hurricane Irma's moisture that was effectively scattered across a huge swath of the eastern U.S.? An extremely anomalous, massive cool-down zone over the most populated regions in America. Why would the climate engineers do this? Why have they been carrying out completely engineered events like this at an ever-increasing scale for some 70 years? To confuse and divide populations in regard to the true extent of climate disintegration. To mask the true severity of the problem until the last possible moment. To keep business as usual for the military-industrial complex, who's been using weather warfare as a preferred covert weapon for 7 decades with no regard whatsoever for the catastrophic consequences. Though the patented chemical ice nucleation processes can and do create engineered snowstorms, like the event covered in this 2009 headline from Fox News, the chemical ice nucleating processes can and are also being utilized for creating extreme cool downs under formerly warm conditions. Cold, dense air sinks to the surface of the planet, creating a shallow but convincing to the population change of weather. But we must ask ourselves this: at what cost to the planet and the web of life do the climate intervention programs come? This is a copy of one chemical ice nucleation for weather modification patent. The highlights in this document are from geoengineeringwatch.org. The entire document can be found online by searching geoengineeringwatch.org Nolenberg patent. What's important to note in this excerpt is the fact that with the chemical nucleation process, ice nucleation can be formed and forced to take place at temperatures far above freezing, as the energy-absorbing endothermic reacting elements cool the clouds and cloud moisture. The desired objectives of the climate engineers are achieved. The ice nucleating elements are also a main contributor to the now increasingly destructive extreme hail events happening all over the globe. Chemically ice-nucleated snowstorms are not only toxic, as already mentioned, they're extremely destructive to the environment and the entire web of life due to the unnatural characteristics of the artificially nucleated snow. This CBS headline from early October 2013 is a case in point. This destructive snowstorm occurred with temperatures pushing 40 degrees and could only have been a result of geoengineering and chemical ice nucleating processes. How could this storm have killed such extreme numbers of livestock when the temperatures were actually well above the freezing point, when the temperatures were far above what cold-hardy South Dakota cattle can endure? Chemically ice-nucleated materials are extremely cold to the touch, thus they can and often do flash burn foliage and any other living organism they come into contact with. Also, in the case of the dead cattle, this must be considered. Chemical nucleated snow at higher temperatures carries an unnaturally high water content, which makes the snow extremely heavy and very adhesive. It sticks to the animal's hides, faces, and snouts. If a cow can't breathe through its snow-clogged nostrils, it can die, as cattle generally will not breathe through their mouth. This map was taken on the day of the chemically nucleated snowstorm in South Dakota, before any such maps were taken offline. And they were taken offline shortly after the event. Examine this map carefully. Examine the temperatures first. Why is it even snowing in South Dakota at 36 degrees? How could it even be 36 degrees when a very short distance away in Chicago it was 85 degrees and raining? In Kansas City it was almost 90 degrees. How could it possibly be cold enough to even snow in South Dakota, let alone cold enough to kill 100,000 cattle? This horrifically destructive storm that occurred on October 4th, 2013 was most certainly a result of patented chemical ice nucleation for weather modification processes. A grand experiment yet again being carried out on American soil by our own government. The same weather warfare chemical ice nucleation assaults have been carried out in many other locations around the world. The event highlighted in this article excerpt is only one tragic example of many. What will it take to wake populations to what's being done to them and to the web of life by the climate engineering insanity? Chemical ice nucleation materials distributed over bodies of water can and have created the recent phenomenon of perfectly spherical ice boulders washing up on shores. Though this phenomenon is historically unprecedented prior to climate engineering operations, it's now occurring from the Baltic Sea to Lake Michigan. How many in academia are turning two blind eyes to so many glaring red flags that are a direct result of climate engineering? The NASA satellite image here, taken in the seas south of Greenland, reveals the completely unnatural sea surface ice nucleation patterns that are also a direct result of climate engineering and environmental modification programs, which include massive sea surface ice nucleation operations. A desperate attempt of the power structure to mask the full extent of our imploding polar ice caps. This NOAA departure from normal high temperature map is the current quote forecast or the schedule weather for the US from the period from September 19th through the 23rd. This scenario reflects a complete reversal of the freeze-fry temperature imbalances as compared to what has been the case in recent weeks in the continental US. The increasingly geoengineered extreme weather whiplash scenarios are decimating the environment and what is yet left of Earth's climate systems. Europe has also been enduring record heat waves, as much of the world has as well, and so much of this not reported by mainstream media, especially not to citizens of the US, or losing track of what's happening around the world. Western Europe is now going to be the recipient of a geoengineered cool-down event with the same climate engineering processes that are being carried out in the Western US. The extreme temperature imbalances shown in this departure from normal temperature map are a hallmark of ongoing engineered cool-down operations. This recent headline also points directly at climate engineering and patented chemical ice nucleation processes. Ammonium nitrate is a primary element in weather modification ice nucleation patents, like the one shown earlier in this video. Such elements would and likely have produced the symptoms in the UK beachgoers and the types of odors they reported smelling. Radical whiplash scenarios are also occurring with the Greenland ice deposits, as this melt extent graph clearly shows. The wild up and down swings of Greenland's surface ice melt is revealing. This type of extreme fluctuation is in fact exactly what on and off chemical ice nucleation assaults or operations on Greenland would be expected to create. How warm are sea surface temperatures in the Arctic? Far above normal, with the heat continuing to escalate. So we should ask ourselves this: why are such unnatural patterns of slush and broken ice forming on sea surfaces with above freezing temperatures in so many cases? Temperatures too warm to support any natural ice nucleation whatsoever. How can so much damning information be hidden from public view in plain sight? And not only is there an illegal federal gag order on all NOAA and National Weather Service employees, which anyone, by the way, can examine by simply searching geoengineeringwatch.org illegal gag order. There's also a new contract between our government and private defense contractor Raytheon. Raytheon is neck deep in geoengineering operations, so they're tasked with giving scripts to the NOAA National Weather Service personnel, scripts that state what the scheduled weather will be. Our so-called meteorologists are also reading the same scripts given to them by the geoengineers. The foxes are indeed running the henhouse. Global geoengineering is completely out of control and wreaking havoc around the globe. Where is it cool and where is it not? The blue zones on this global departure from average temperature map show the coming cool down zones that are currently scheduled by the climate engineers. The Western US, Western Europe, and Antarctica, where the recent collapse of the Delaware-sized Larsen Sea ice shelf has the climate engineers in a panic. The extreme imbalances revealed on this map are beyond alarming. Every operation carried out by the climate engineers is further fueling the overall planetary meltdown. Short-term, highly toxic cooldowns at the cost of a worsened overall warming. This is the fruits of geoengineering. The recent and continuing rash of hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin that the climate engineers have at minimum allowed to develop are being used as moisture pumps to prime the atmosphere with the needed water vapor for fueling solar radiation management and chemical ice nucleated cooldowns. This recent rash of hurricanes comes on the heels of a 12-year major hurricane landfall drought due to patented hurricane suppression technologies. And I would remind everyone that Hurricane Sandy was not a major hurricane. We're talking about major hurricane landfalls. And those who think that suppressing Earth's attempts to cool itself is a good thing, it's not a good thing. It's keeping a lid on a boiling kettle. The planet is warming rapidly, and to suppress the hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin is not only killing oceans, it's disrupting the entire hydrological cycle, many other downstream effects, not time to note those here. Interfering with Earth's natural systems yields very bad results, with no exceptions. All available information also makes clear that cyclones are actively being steered and manipulated. There's no question of this if, again, all available data is actually examined. There are indeed many other agendas being carried out by the climate engineers, along with those just mentioned. The complete contamination of the biosphere by the climate engineering heavy metal and chemical fallout is yet another threat posed by these programs. We must all pay attention to the bigger picture, to a global perspective. Only then can we correctly connect the dots. Climate engineering is the greatest and most immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm. Finally, in closing, these 2 points must always be remembered and considered. There could be no legitimate discussion about the state of the climate without first and foremost including climate engineering. And there could be no legitimate discussion about climate engineering without first and foremost including the patented chemical ice nucleation processes. All of us are needed in the critical battle to sound the alarm and to raise awareness. Arm yourself with credible informational materials, which are available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Help us sound the alarm. Time's not on our side. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.
Tell us your name.
Serena Santos.
And Serena, how long ago did you have the HPV card sold?
16 years ago. 17.
And what made you have it?
I was a child of the system, so I had no choice.
What does that mean?
I was in a lot of residential treatment facilities and stuff like that. I was a child of New York State, in like throughout the fostering system and all that, so I didn't have much choice.
So actually that's so interesting because I'm hearing that you guys in that fostering system were guinea pigs for vaccines.
Absolutely.
And drugs.
Every time that we would go to a new facility, because your insurance would run out and they would send you to the next place. And every time we would go to a new one, they claimed they didn't have our vaccine records and would revaccinate us again.
And there's nothing you can do about it?
Not a thing. If you say no, they will hold you down and do it. You don't have any say at all in the system.
That's barbaric.
It is absolutely barbaric.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thank you.
So you're in the system and it's got us all time.
Mm-hmm.
And did they tell you why it's important to have such a thing?
Just take this. I was not told any risks, nothing.
Or benefits?
Nope. Didn't even know what it was until I was an adult and I did my research learning that I was vaccine injured.
So you took three rounds?
As a child of the system, I'm assuming more.
Oh, okay, so tell us what happened. What was the injuries like?
So I wasn't even diagnosed. It took years to get diagnosed. I was in a facility and my arm was broken. And that day in the hospital, I mentioned a burning sensation in my arm. And it was ignored as a child of the system. And when I was 21 years old, I was finally diagnosed with complex regional pain syndrome. And they told me without a doubt it came from that period. Because when I broke my arm, it comes from an injury. But later on, when I was a part of the chronic pain community, one of my fellow warriors shared a study about complex regional pain syndrome following Gardasil vaccination. And that is when I realized I was injured.
So what does a day look like for you now dealing with this injury? What's it taken from you?
I have recovered a lot of it since. I was at one point in a wheelchair, legally blind, and on 26 medications a day. Yeah.
And who was looking after you as someone as board of state? Who was looking after you?
At that time, this didn't happen, my medication and my treatment didn't start until I was 21.
So then what happens at 21 in the foster system? You're just thrown out?
Well, I was out of the system at 17 when I was emancipated. And I just wasn't diagnosed because nobody would take me seriously. I would go to doctor after doctor saying, my arm is on fire. It hurts. I can't touch it. And I went through this from the age of 14 until I was 21 when one doctor finally took me seriously and was like, I think you have complex regional pain syndrome. So they sent me for another doctor to confirm the diagnosis, and I was diagnosed on the spot. And upon diagnosis, I started treatment, and within that year, my first year of treatment, I underwent 12 surgeries and procedures, nearly killing me and leaving me in a wheelchair and legally blind until I was finally done with the system and I stopped everything and I slowly started to recover on my own.
So how do you recover from something so far down?
It would look different for everyone. For me, my first step was I got off of the medication because that was a lot of medication and everything was interacting with everything. After I took myself off of medication, I switched to herbal remedies instead, and I focused on healing my gut and healing all the internal stuff, the inflammation, the haywire brain signals, which is what complex regional pain syndrome is, and that is what I focused on. And within 2 weeks of stopping all the medications that they had me on over the years, I was able to walk again. For the first time in my life, basically, my older adolescence to adulthood, I was pain-free. And I remain in a remission, and that I went on that journey in 2019 is when I finally said no more to the medications.
Do you have children?
I do not.
But you have?
I do have a husband.
A husband?
I do.
Thank you for being a good husband, taking care of her.
Yes.
I'm so pleased you found. I still feel really terrible that. I don't know, what do we do to help these foster kids? We have to help them.
It's so hard.
It seems like the worst kind of abuse that you can.
It is that the system is the absolute worst. Personally, in my own experience, the last facility I was in, it was shut down for sex trafficking.
Really?
Yeah, they were shut down for sex trafficking. And another facility I was in, the one where I was vaccine injured, they broke my arm in the facility, they broke another child's leg and killed a child in there. And they continued to run, and they still are there today.
Why did they break someone's arm?
They were not properly trained in restraining. They were just a very horrible place, I guess you could say.
How old are the kids
in that facility? They were all teenagers. I think the youngest girl, if I remember correctly, was about 10 or 11, and she was my roommate at the time, and the oldest was, if I'm not mistaken, like 17.
I think it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. And it's just crazy. That one facility, they broke my arm, they broke another child's leg, and the one child that they killed, they were holding him down, restraining him, and he started seizing, and they thought he was lying, and he died while I was there.
And nobody cares?
No. Anytime that anybody tries to speak up on it, including staff, I witnessed it myself, they fire them. They get fired and they run them through the works, and there's no way to speak up, really. It's so hard, and especially because these facilities were in New York State, and they don't care at all.
So you've got, I don't know how many people are in a home or whatever.
It really depends on the facility. Some of them will have like different buildings. The first place I was in, where my injury occurred, there were like 5 different buildings, and each building had about 30 or 40 kids.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
And so what happens on vaccination day? Doctor comes in and you all line up?
No, not even. You don't get a doctor. It is, I remember mine were nurses. The nurses that gave us, that would dope us up on medication every day, would also give us our vaccinations.
So you had to take medication?
You had no choice. If you did not take it, it was injected into you forcefully.
Why?
It's how they make their money.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. This is just awful.
Yeah.
Well, at least you've got a lovely husband.
I do.
You've got a nice life ahead. And
I do.
When you have kids, you ever going to vaccinate them?
Absolutely not.
No, hell no.
I don't even vaccinate my dog.
No, good for you.
No. She is, even my dog is 100% natural. She eats better than most humans.
Well, if you come up with any bright ideas of how we can help these foster kids, we have to help them.
We do.
They are children. We are children's health defence.
Right.
We have to help them.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's really upsetting, your story. I'm sorry. I'm glad you're feeling better, though.
Thank you.
And like I say, people you can't see him, but she's got a lovely husband sitting behind her.
Yes.
She's going to be loved for the rest of her life, which is important. You deserve it.
He deserves to be recognized because we vowed in marriage while I was still sick. He said in sickness and health, and we never thought we would see health in me. And he supported me day in and day out. He took care of me, worked 2-3 jobs at a time to cover my medical bills. He is my life.
He's wonderful.
He is.
And you so deserve to have someone good in your life.
Thank you.
And know what real love is.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you for having me.